This is a law and policy session all about drones. To my knowledge, Representative Torbett, are you a lawyer?
No.
No, so I'm the only lawyer up here. So I don't know if part of the reason y'all were sitting back was because y'all were thinking there was a bunch of lawyers up here. I'm the only lawyer up here. I'm a partner at the Brooks Pierce law firm down the street here. And I'll introduce these folks to you shortly. Let me get a show of hands before we even get started. Do we have any manned aircraft pilots in the audience? Anybody who flies? Okay, pilots. And do we have anybody who is currently using drones in their operations? Okay. And of those people, and remember I'm a lawyer, it's not attorney-client privilege, but of the people who raise their hands who are using drones for commercial purposes, how many of y'all have your RPIC airman certificate? Okay, most, good, okay. So it sounds so far like we're a fairly experienced bunch who have some perspective here.
One more question. Anybody from the FAA?
Okay, good. Fair enough. Good. Fair enough. So what we're here for today is to try to share some information with y'all about the UAS environment, and in particular about the legal elements of the UAS environment. And we want you to have the skills and the tools and the resources and the knowledge as to help you figure out how you can best integrate drones into your operations if you are so inclined. I think UAS technology here is particularly relevant. We're not going to go into a bunch of use cases here. I think there's another panel that Kyle's going to be on that will talk about use cases. But I think generally speaking, in the GIS community, I think there's a lot of use cases for using drones. When we talk about drones, it really has so little to do with the actual flying device, although that's what we hear about on a daily basis, is how exciting the technology is. What it really has to do more with is the data that's being collected. And I think that, members of the GIS community collect and use and crunch an awful lot of data in what they do day to day, irrespective of which sort of sector of the community you're involved with. So I think that drones are particularly relevant to y'all's operations, or at least have the potential to be particularly relevant. And we want to make sure that you get off on the right foot in considering and in using the new technology. So as we're going to discuss here today, the FAA, which you probably heard about last year, adopted some regulations finally at long last, after considering them for nearly a decade, adopted some regulations to provide a regulatory regime that would allow commercial operation of drones in the United States. And in addition, North Carolina has adopted some laws that also govern and regulate the use of drones within the state of North Carolina. We're going to cover both those issues today. In addition, y'all should understand that even before the adoption of these laws and regulations, there were members of the GIS community that had already incorporated drones into their operations. The FAA had an authorization system that existed prior to its so-called Part 107 rules, where it issued something like 5,500 authorizations for folks in all variety of industries to use drones for commercial purposes. And there was a large segment of that I think it would be fair to characterize as part of the GIS community. So drones aren't necessarily new to the GIS community, but I think that what is new, while we're here sort of on the opening edge of this exciting industry that's being built from the ground up, the laws and the legal aspects of drone operations are sort of new at this point, and hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit of education here. What we're also hoping, what everybody on this panel is hoping, is that y'all will also give us some education. We've all of us have spoken about drones to any number of different sets of stakeholders. What we really like to get educated about is how any particular segment of the stakeholders anticipates using drones, the information that they're really thinking about, what's on their mind when it comes to drone operations. So we hope that this will be somewhat of a dialogue, and that even though y'all are sitting 4 rows and further back, that y'all will speak up and help us to understand what your specific interests are and what questions you have. So as we go through, as each panelist is speaking, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. We're not saving questions for a Q&A at the end, so please be participatory. So let me go ahead and introduce the folks on the panel. We've got Representative John Torbett, who represents Gaston County in the General Assembly. You will notice that his badge says speaker, and I think it also says honored guest. Is that true?
It does say
honored guest. So Representative John Torbett. represents Gaston County in the General Assembly, and he is the legislator in North Carolina when it comes to UAS issues. Good guy to know, and he wants to make sure, as he will tell you, that North Carolina is on the cutting edge when it comes to this technology. In addition, we have Chris Gibson, who currently serves as the UAS program manager for the North Carolina Department of Transportation. We also have Wayne Bailey down at the end. Wayne served until recently as the Deputy Director of Fire and Rescue in the Office of the State Fire Marshal, which is within the Department of Insurance. That sounds like an awful lot of bureaucracy to me, but I think we're going to get some good words from Wayne. And then last but not least is Kyle Snyder. Some of you may know Kyle. Kyle is he's truly a luminary in the UAS industry nationwide, and he's currently the director of the Next Gen Air Transportation Program here in town at NC State. So these four panelists are going to provide you with their insight into certain considerations that will help you hopefully understand sort of the legal fabric that underlies the industry. So I think without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Torbett to start the discussion.
Thank you. Can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to stand up and walk because I sit all day. I'm here for one good purpose today. I want to start by ruining your summer. I'm going to ruin your summer right now. Who all here remembers when the Jaws movie came out? Who all went into the water just shortly after you went to watch that movie? See what I mean? So here's how I'm going to ruin your summer. Today, if you go outside and you see a dragonfly flying around, if you're laying out on the beach or something, it's probably, guess what? It's probably a dragonfly. By this summer, if you see a dragonfly flying around and you're out on the beach or anywhere in your backyard, you better look twice because it might be an unmanned air system. Okay? They're coming. The insects are on their way. First it was the quads, or first it was a fixed wing, it was the quads, and now it's the return of the insects. It's not going to be the locusts. Of course, after Lady Gaga's performance at the Super Bowl, I guess it could be a swarm of locusts now, right? So just double check now when you're laying there. If you hear something buzzing around, you might want to take a second long look at that thing, okay? So don't be afraid to get in the water, though. It's okay. It's wonderful to be here. Thank y'all for having me. Honest, it's great to be with real people from where I came from. We've just spent multiple days down there talking about great and wise things for the people of North Carolina. But it's great to be here where the rubber meets the road. Thank y'all for this. Let me tell you a little bit how I got involved in this. I spent a career in the pulp and paper industry. Great field, did wonderful things, retired, was sitting around. I ran for county commissioner in the great county of Gaston County, North Carolina, just to the west of Charlotte, Mecklenburg. And I served there for 8 years. Got to know our GIS people. They're here. Juan, there you go. Great bunch of folks. And then these people came up to me and said, Representative or Commissioner Torbett, we'd like to talk to you. What is it? I said, we'd like you to come to work with us. I said, what do you guys do? I said, well, we work with DOD. And we work specifically in a myriad of fields, but one of those facets was unmanned systems. Cool. So anyway, I started working with them. Had a great time. Met some wonderful people. Some with sand still on their boots. A lot of wonderful men and women that serving our country in areas that I wouldn't even like to visit, much less go live and serve in. But that was an inspiration to me, and the best part of it is they paid me at the same time, which was great. But it opened my eyes to the world of unmanned systems, and when I got started in it was fixed wing. It was big birds, littler birds, just the beginning of the backpack or the carry in, so you could pretty much sling it down the road and see what was coming over the hill. That was where we got our start. We got started in the command and control. Back then, everyone had a stovepipe solution for how to command or operate these systems in the field. And our friends at DOD tasked us with trying to find some open architecture where we could take one command and control or operating system and control multiple assets, as they called them, and multiple platforms, and whether it be air, ground, sea surface, or subsurface. And then at that same time, work with different types of those vehicles, whether it be in the air, ground, sea, or subsurface. So we were tasked with that. And when I exited that to do this gig I have in Raleigh now, that's where I left that in a kind of a state of hiatus. When I came to Raleigh, I realized what was coming. And how did I know what was coming? And I was telling a gentleman earlier today, I can remember as if it was yesterday, I sit in my office, and I hear these footsteps running down the hall towards my office. And it's one of my engineers. I always could tell what it was. He had an idea. He was making a beeline to my office. And he banged on the door. I said, yeah, come in, come in. He came in and says, man, he had with him what looked to be an erector set from when we've grown. Y'all probably not as old as I am remember a erector set, what you used to build at home, gadgets and gizmos. It looked like one of those, but it was a quad chopper. He said, these things are coming and they're going to be everywhere. He was right. He was absolutely right. And he was about probably, I'm just thinking 15 years ago. And now for the last several Christmases in a row, do you know what's the largest selling Christmas present that's under the tree for every Johnny and Jane in the United States? It's been one of these little UASs. Used to, you had to go to Lockheed to get one. Or if you had to get, perhaps go to, if you wanted a Predator, you had to go to General Atomics or somebody. And now you can go to Belk and buy them. Fascinating. Then I started seeing how you can incorporate those in the world. I came up to Raleigh, started looking in the, I don't know if y'all know this, but we make laws up here. Did y'all know that? Great and wonderful laws. But I started looking at it and said there was nothing out there to address from a citizen's perspective the use of UASs, and I knew they were coming. They were proliferating everywhere. They were coming. They were on the way. But we had nothing on the books. So I started getting some things and started putting some things together, and actually met Kyle. Great. I tell everybody he's my brain trust. He's the prof, as it would. Of course, he also came from Middle Tennessee State University. I went to Middle Tennessee State University, so there's that Blue Raider kind of thing we got going on. But anyway, that's another story. And he's worked with me to try to make it good for citizens, good for commerce, good for markets, without impeding, without stopping. Because my biggest fear at that point, listening to my colleagues, was there would be no access for UAS in the skies of North Carolina if my colleagues had had anything to do with it, because they were so fearful of them. And what was the most fearful thing I heard from them more times than not? What if I'm out back laying by my swimming pool and my neighbor flies one over that was their mindset about what an unmanned system was going to do, or a drone that you more commonly hear. So I started enlightening them on what the actual operational capabilities of this would be, and what it would mean to North Carolina, what it would mean to a growing emerging market, what it would mean to every facet of government, every facet of private citizens, private market individuals, hobbyists, photography, just the works. And I can tell you that, and I've told this to a lot of people, if you sit down and start writing all of the uses you could think of with a UAS, I promise you will be here next week still writing. Because it's endless. It is just absolutely endless of what it can do. So I started talking to them. I said, we need to get something on the books, because I know what's going to happen. We're going to hear an outcry from the citizens if we don't have something out there. And the outcry is going to be, do not let these things come. Stop. Do not let them come. So we started talking about private property, personal safety and security. And then the first thing we did, we went through all the books and said what laws are applicable just by using the UAS. Peeping laws, for example. You can't go up to your neighbor's windows and peep in. That's against the law. You shouldn't do it, but you can't do it because it's against the law. Well, you can't do it with the UAS either. So we just kind of blended all these in together. And then we said that what laws do we need to put in there specific to UAS that aren't currently on the books. And then we came up with, we didn't create a word. It's out there, but a word I like to use because nobody understands what it is. Curtilage. Anybody here know what curtilage is? I love it. So in the law, you'll see the term curtilage. Now, my lawyers, I'm not one, my lawyers in the state government told me put that in there because that is, now I'm a child of the 60s, okay? To me, curtilage is your expanded aura. Everybody know what an aura is? Everybody's got one, right? Yours is orange. I can see it from here. I'm teasing. So curtilage is kind of your domain, your area, where you are, what you're doing, your property, where it's just kind of like a bubble of you, if you would. And that was the only way our lawyers could come up with that, so it would give the law school people something to scratch their head about and say, okay, well, you can't enter someone's curtilage, you can't photograph, you can't do that without their permission, that type of stuff. So we started looking at permissions to do this. And I think we came up with some pretty good stuff, which you'll hear from the smarter guys in the room than me, and started putting those things to paper. And then this actually happened. I was presenting in one of my committees. I chair transportation, policy, appropriations. Anybody here from the state DOT? Pretty cool being the chair of the appropriations committee, isn't it? Yes, it is. You call over there, hello, Mr. Secretary, you got a minute? Be right there. Just teasing, just teasing. Great guy.
I will be too.
Exactly right. Great guy, great guy. But was having a committee because I have to find funding for us for transportation throughout the state in all modes. I've been told anything that moves, I'm responsible for. Thank you very much. So we're trying to find funding. So one of those committees, we were talking about UASs and how they could, aid and assist and do with work, road design and stuff. And then we started pushing this bill through the House. And actually, while I was chairing a committee talking about this bill, this thing popped into my head, and I have named them. They're called Bubba scenarios. Do you know what a Bubba scenario is? Anybody here named Bubba? Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. Bubba scenario. Well, I'll give you a hint on some of the outcomes from those. Is you can't hunt with one. You can't fish with one on a UAS. But the Bubba scenario that really got me was you can't chase the 777 down the tarmac as it's taking off because Grandma's sitting in the window seat aisle 3 and get a picture of Grandma as she's taking off on the 777. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that. Then we started incorporating some Bubba laws in, and those are pretty simplistic. You can't arm one. I mean, come on. You just can't do that. We've all seen that on YouTube, right? A guy straps a gun onto it. Obviously, he didn't come through the institutions of higher education in the state of North Carolina. So we incorporated some of those in, and we blend the law. Now what we're doing is that each year, and I might add, when our law came out, we weren't the first state in the union to have laws about UAS, but we were one of the first. And we were purposely pushing FAA to get off their duff and get some laws out there because they were coming. Whether the laws are going to be there or not, they were coming. They were coming, and they were coming hard, and they were coming fast. So we wanted to have something out there. And I used to work with FAA. I was fortunate enough to be able to get one of the first boxes of national airspaces that abutted D.C. airspace. That was fun, getting from FAA to do some experimental flights back in the day. So I'd already worked with these guys. I used to kid them all the time. Do you know what their motto should be at FAA? We're not happy until you're not happy. Don't tell them I said that. But great guys are concerned about our safety. And so we started working all this together and blending. And so now what I'm doing is I'm working on language as we speak over the last several sessions to have our state laws mirror what the federal government is doing. So give you an example, and I think they think they did this one to spite me. North Carolina law had operators age at 18. I think they read North Carolina law and said, we're going to make ours 16. So now to be an operator, you can be 16. So I had to come back 2 years later and change our operating age from 18 to 16. So now I'm drafting legislation that will simply say, if the federal say this, therefore North Carolina does this. So I don't have to come back year after year after year. And also working within the community to try to make it easier, more accessible, more free. It's still an emerging market. It's just a wonderful device to have. It's limitless on its capability. We haven't even seen anywhere over the horizon on where this is going. And I look forward to doing that in the years to come as long as I can. And I'm glad you guys are participating. I'm glad you're here today. I'm glad you're taking advantage of this. If you haven't, you need to get one. You need to learn how it can make you money. It can save you money. And it can be a new and exciting venture as we move on into the future. Thank you for being here, and I'm available for any questions.
Thanks, Representative Torbett. Does anybody have any questions for Representative Torbett or about curtilage generally or anything else? Okay. So let me, I'm not going to go into a Q&A with you, but let me just make a couple points to play off of what Representative Torbett said. You know, it's sort of, it's the joke is weaponizing weaponizing UAS, and you've seen the YouTube video, like Representative Torbett said, of the people who connected a gun or a blowtorch to a drone and they're doing stuff in their backyard. Just imagine if you took the ingenuity that was applied to that project and you actually used it for positive productive means, whether it's for better mapping, for better surveying, whatever. I think that would really be a positive use of UAS that we could all get behind. The other thing that I want to mention about the North Carolina law is one thing that's important to understand that Representative Torbett didn't specifically mention is so the FAA has its set of regulations, but the FAA as a federal agency, like most federal agencies, has very limited time and resources to actually police its regulations and compliance with its regulations. I'm not suggesting, and I'm being serious, I'm not suggesting that you ignore those regulations just because it's hard for the FAA to police them, but another function of having laws on the books in North Carolina is that it means that local law enforcement can get after rogue drone users under state law, even if the FAA never becomes aware of these activities or doesn't have the opportunity to enforce their own regulations. So that's sort of another benefit to having a North Carolina specific regime. So let me turn it over to Chris Gibson so that he can tell you a little bit about the FAA's Part 107 and the North Carolina law. And let me also apologize, because the only thing that I found that it's worse than having a lawyer do a presentation like this is a lawyer with a bunch of slides. And so I beat these guys up about not bringing any slides to this presentation. Chris normally would have a deck that's about 50 slides long, and I told him not to bring it. So, okay, that's the lawyer version. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's going to tell you about the law.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Just like Representative Torbett said, we want to make sure that we're giving you guys the information that you need so that you can make the best use of UAS or drones in your businesses, in your daily lives. And you can also kind of keep a watch out for us on some of the other folks that may not be doing the right thing and help them understand that there are some rules out there. So one of the things, I've been in this business, been dealing with UAS for 22 years. So for the longest time, kind of the attitude was there are no regulations for UAS, so therefore you can kind of do whatever you want to do. The reality is there weren't any specific regulations that were specific to UAS. However, since a UAS or an unmanned aircraft system is an aircraft, all the federal aviation regulations applied. Okay, so based on that, that's why for commercial operations you weren't allowed to use UAS. There was a hobbyist, basically a blanket hobbyist exemption that had been around forever and was originally designed for people that build model airplanes in their garage and they're part of a local RC club and they fly out at a specific site and all that kind of thing. That has evolved somewhat to cover some of the recreational uses of unmanned aircraft systems, whether they be quad rotors or fixed wing aircraft, regardless. But up until this past year, the FAA basically said, okay, if you want to operate a drone in the United States within the domestic airspace, you have to go through a waiver process. And that waiver process was a case-by-case process. So if you applied for a waiver, you'd have to tell them what type of drone, where you're going to operate it, what your procedures are, all those kinds of things. They go through, they evaluate and either reject it or give you permission. And then if you wanted to do the exact same thing, you had to go through the entire process again. That's not efficient for anybody. Nobody liked it. Nobody in the industry liked it. Nobody in the operational community liked it, and the FAA didn't like it. Because, again, it was this waiver process they had to deal with one at a time. It was time-consuming, and it was very difficult to standardize. Like any big bureaucracy, they don't like situations that don't kind of fall within their regulatory construct. So they've been working for a long time, finally came out with Part 107, which is the Federal Aviation Regulation, Part 107 is the designation for that portion of the law that is specifically addresses small unmanned aircraft system use in the United States in domestic airspace for commercial purposes. That you can apply Part 107 to public uses, basically whether it be law enforcement or firefighting, those things as well. As far as an exemption, those fall under a different process. However, you can use Part 107 for that. But basically what Part 107 did when it went into effect last August was put in place a standardized structure for what you can and you can't do with UAS in the national airspace, what the qualifications are and all those types of things so that it can become routine. Without going through all the details of Part 107, I saw earlier where there were a number of people that have gotten their Part 107 remote pilot certificates. That's good. Anybody that's going to be operating UAS for commercial purposes needs to either go through that or you need to have a piloting command on site that has gone through that and has gotten that certification from the FAA. But basically what it involves for anybody that doesn't already have a pilot's license, it involves you going through a process where you have to go to a FAA testing center, take a test that's designed specifically for remote pilots or for unmanned aircraft system users, pass that test, and then they put you through a background check, TSA background check, all those types of things. And they'll give you a remote pilot certificate. At that point, you are authorized by the FAA to operate a small UAS in the national airspace within a certain set of restrictions. The kind of the biggies on those restrictions are things like daylight operation only, no operation over people, basically over the public. If you're there's some exceptions there for law enforcement and for news organizations and news gathering events, things like that. But in general, you're not supposed to go flying down the city streets or flying over a kid's soccer game or something like that where you're over non-participants, people that aren't participating in the operation and they aren't undercover. If people are inside a building or inside a car, then from the perspective of that rule, they don't really count. Some other things, you want to stay below 400 feet above the ground. The reason for that is because one of the biggest jobs the FAA has is to maintain the safety of our airspace system here in the United States. For that reason, the FAA has exclusive sovereignty over the use of that airspace. Okay, airspace is not regulated at the local level. It's not regulated at the state level. It's regulated at the federal level. Have a common set of airspace access requirements, airspace use requirements, et cetera, across the entire country. One of the big things there is manned aviation, with the exception of doing takeoff and landing and then some low-level stuff for things like search and rescue, law enforcement, crop dusting and things like that. Manned aircraft are supposed to operate at 500 feet and above. Okay, so they should be above the ground at least 500 feet unless they're in the vicinity of an airport and that type of thing. So for small UAS, the biggest way to deconflict those things was to say, okay, if manned aircraft are operating up here, we're going to make sure the unmanned aircraft operate down here. Most of you have probably seen some of these quad rotor drones that are out there. There was a couple sitting in the exhibit hall in here, and you see how small those are. So now imagine an aircraft flying around, even a pretty slow-moving private aircraft flying at 100 miles an hour. How much time would they have to react when they actually saw that vehicle? It's pretty small. You're not going to see it from very far away. Even if they have lights on during the day, those lights, get drowned out by the background solar radiation. So you're going to get pretty close before you see that thing, and then it becomes an issue with the manned aircraft trying to get out of the way. The unmanned aircraft, hopefully the operator has seen the manned aircraft and is trying to get out of the way. All those types of things. The last thing we want to have happen, either from the unmanned side, because it would ruin the industry, or the manned side, because it's going to cost somebody their life, is to have a mid-air collision. Okay, so for that reason, we're keeping unmanned aircraft below 400 feet, unless there's a specific waiver granted to go higher than that. So there are certain places with certain types of aircraft where they are allowing operations at higher altitude, but again, those are on case-by-case basis, and they have to be done in coordination with air traffic control and all those types of things. For those same reasons, the FAA is basically asking or telling small UAS operators to stay away from airports. Okay, so for most recreational users, that's not a big deal. They can stay away from an airport. There's no reason they need to be near an airport. For users like yourselves doing GIS work, you may be doing some work at the airport or in an area close by the airport within the 3-mile buffer or the 5-mile buffer of the airport, where you do need to be operating your UAS. They do have provisions in there that allow you to do that with coordination with local air traffic control. Basically, in that case, they want to make sure you're in contact with the airport, their air traffic control, so that they know where you are. They can relay that information to their pilot, and then they can relay to you any information about emergency situations or people coming in at odd altitudes or any of that kind of thing, so we can make sure that nobody runs into one another. So that's kind of the basics of Part 107 there. You have to register your aircraft. Everybody does, whether they're a hobbyist, a hobbyist recreational user, a commercial user, government user, it doesn't matter. Everybody's got to register their aircraft if it's over 0.55 pounds, so basically half a pound or more. And then Part 107 covers anything that's operating any small UAS that's smaller than 55 pounds. If you want to operate that, you can go get your Part 107 remote pilot certificate, and those are good for 2 years. More details on that are all available on our website. Our website here in North Carolina is as was mentioned before, it's housed under NCDOT. So it's ncdot.gov/aviation/UAS. If you go to that website, there's a lot of information there. We've got links. You can basically scroll down, and there's some links that I think say resources or downloads or something like that. Go to that, and it'll take you to pages where you can get everything from full text of the Part 107 rule, which I imagine nobody wants to read. It's about 600 pages. To a summary, which is about a page and a half of that rule, which is much more reasonable. Links to the FAA that describe their process for getting your remote pilot certificate, all that type of thing, as well as a bunch of resources for North Carolina. We've got everything ranging from again, full text of the laws that we have here in North Carolina, to summaries of that, bullet point summaries of that, to flyers that you could put up, that you can either hand out at a booth or you could put up at your place of business, any of those types of things that give you kind of the highlights of the law, whether it be for commercial, government use, or recreational use. We've got all of that stuff there. But the biggest thing about our website, if you go to that site again, ncdot.gov/aviation/UAS, what you'll see when you get there is basically a one-stop shop to give you all that type of information that I talked about, but also to allow you to go through and study for and then take the North Carolina UAS Operators Knowledge Test all online, and then get your North Carolina Operator's Permit. So one of the things that was done in North Carolina law, basically, some of this was done before Part 107, really all of this was done before Part 107 came out, but it's still valid today. We want to make sure that people in North Carolina, operating in North Carolina, not only understand what the federal requirements are and comply with those, we want to make sure that they understand what North Carolina's requirements are, what the specific rules in North Carolina are relating to how the operator or the aircraft, the unmanned aircraft system interact with people and property on the ground in the state. Okay, so while the FAA is taking care of the airspace piece in terms of regulation, they're not dealing with privacy. They're not dealing with private property rights. They're not dealing with the safety and interaction of people on the ground that are related to this UAS. So that's what we're doing here in North Carolina. Basically, not trying to do the FAA's job, but rather to supplement that and make sure we're taking care of the citizens and visitors here in the state. Representative Torbett talked about a couple of the key regulations we have here in the state already. Can't put a weapon on these things. Have to treat them like an aircraft, so no, you can't shoot them out of the sky either. That's a question that I always get. You're not allowed to use them to take pictures and then distribute those pictures for anything where you wouldn't be able to see with your regular eyeballs anyway. For example, he talked about curtilage a little bit, and that kind of ties into the reasonable expectation of privacy. Most people don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their front yard. Somebody can walk down the street, it's a public street, or it's a street where anybody has access, and what they can see in the front yard with their eyes from the street, there's no expectation of privacy there. But if you have a fenced-in backyard, whether you have a pool or whatever else, but you have a fenced-in backyard or a hedged-in backyard, you do have a reasonable expectation of privacy there, okay? So that applies to a UAS just like it would apply to a person on a ladder or a person with a big, long selfie stick or anything else, okay? So those types of things are what we're dealing with. Obviously, like we said, you can't put a weapon on them, you can't use them to hunt or fish. You can't, in order to operate these things, obviously you have to take off and land somewhere. You need permission from the property owner for wherever you do that. Okay, so if I wanted to launch out of my backyard and land in my backyard, I'm perfectly fine. If I want to launch and land out of my neighbor's backyard, I need their permission to do that. That's again dealing with people's privacy and private property rights. So all of those rules are there as well, and we have a study guide on our website right there on that front page that you can click on download. It's about 25 pages, a lot of which is pictures that you can go through to make sure you understand what all the North Carolina laws are. Okay, so once we've now that we've established these laws in North Carolina, we want to make sure that people in the state understand what those are. While it is true that ignorance of the law is not an excuse, even though you don't know what the law is, you're still liable for it. We want to give people every opportunity to understand what the rules are so that they can do things properly. So we put that study guide together, and we have this knowledge test in place that allows us to do our due diligence in making sure that people understand what the rules are in North Carolina before we go then and authorize them as a state agency, say, okay, you're authorized to operate in the state. Basically, once you've taken that test, passed that test, all of that's done online. You don't have to go anywhere or any of that kind of stuff. It's all done online. You can apply for a permit, again, all online. Basically, the permitting process asks you for things like your driver's license number and your date of birth, your name and address, okay? You provide that information. If you've passed the test, we can check and see that you've met the age requirements. Then we'll issue right there online your permit, your North Carolina operator's permit. So again, all that stuff can be done online. Currently, it's free to do all that. There's no charge whatsoever for all of that. We started that up last January 2016, and it's still no cost to do that. Come about April, May, we're going to be releasing a new version of that online solution that gives you a lot more capability to manage your profiles and set up all kinds of different information and things like that in there. But at that point, there will be a charge that'll come into play. So if you don't have your North Carolina permit right now, you think you might need it in the next year or so, go ahead and do it while it's still free. Like I say, April, May time frame, there's going to be a charge that'll be applied there. The charge is like $25, so it's not prohibitive, but there will be a charge there. So all of that's there and available on our website. If you have any questions, that'd be probably the first place I would direct you. After that, obviously, you can call. There's a contact information there on that page. That contact stuff comes to me. My phone number is up there as well. And then, if anybody has questions, I'm here afterwards, and I've got cards that I can give out with my direct line. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Did you speak to the registration, federal registration?
Briefly.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, if you have a drone, pretty much anything that you're going to be buying these days is going to be in that weight class between 0.55 pounds and 55 pounds. But if you have a drone, you need to register it with the FAA. That's I think the website for that is registermyuas.faa.gov. It's $5. It takes you 5 minutes. They basically give you a number there. If you're registering it as a hobbyist drone, then they'll give you one number that you can use for every drone you own, every hobbyist drone you own. Any drone that's going to be used for any kind of commercial purposes whatsoever, you have to register those individually. And you have to provide serial numbers and that kind of thing, and they give you a specific number for each one. So.
That's great. Let me ask, how many of y'all, by a show of hands, were aware that there was a North Carolina permitting process? Okay, I'm impressed by that. I'm
sorry, I thought very impressed.
No, that's
yeah.
I'm very impressed by that. Do you know off the top of your head, Chris, I think I've asked you this before, do you know how many permits have been issued under the North Carolina system?
I don't know off the top of my head. The number spiked, as you can imagine. Last September, the FAA's Part 107 rule went into place on August 29th, I think. And so we had a big spike right after that. I think we had something like 600 by the end of the year last year. We get numbers every month, but I don't always remember.
Sure.
So.
Well, I think that's great. One of the things that I'd always been concerned about with the permitting process was that there weren't enough resources behind public education. But I think the show of hands clearly indicates that word's getting out. So kudos to you all for paying attention, and kudos to the DOT for getting the word out.
And that's a great point. We very much appreciate you guys and all the communities that we go and talk to, continuing to help get the word out that, hey, there are regulations, there are permits required, and that kind of thing. You think of it just like any other kind of business permit. You need a business permit to operate a business. So if you're going to do commercial operations, you need a permit for UAS. So getting that word out, we depend very much on groups like this to help do that within your spheres of influence. So.
Great. Anybody have any specific questions for Chris?
Is there any thought if a drone was of a certain weight size that it would have to have a transponder on it? So the FAA, if you know who they were?
Yes. Yes, that's something that's being considered and has been considered for quite a while. The expectation at this point is that for aircraft that fall outside of, above the weight limit for small UAS. So small UAS are defined as 55 pounds and less. Okay. And that's what.
Think about that for a second. 55 pounds. 55 pounds is a pretty big. That's a sizable object, right? But that's considered small UAS.
Right. So 55 pounds and less, 100 mile an hour flight speed and less. Okay. So. Right. So the expectation right now is that there will be transponder requirements for anything above that weight limit, that falls outside of that small UAS class. There's discussions about driving that down into the small UAS class. Some of that's technology driven. The transponders that we're talking about tend to be a little bit heavy, a little bit power hungry for these small UAS. Most of the small UAS that you see flying around out there are between 3 and 5 pounds. All right, the vast majority, probably 95% of the platforms that are running around out there are between 3 and 5 pounds, and they just can't support that type of the type of load that's required. Nor can they support the cost of. There are some really small ones, but they're very expensive because they're very small volume right now. So as technology keeps rolling along, we fully expect that everything to be getting smaller, cheaper, less power, all those types of things, and we'll drive those into, those will eventually be driven in. But that'll be done primarily from the federal level, not at the state level. We don't certify aircraft. That's something that the FAA does. That's a great question.
And can you repeat the question because it's being recorded?
Sure. So the question was, for the North Carolina UAS operator's permit, does everybody need one of those, including the recreational users? And the answer is no. So in North Carolina, if you're going to operate for a commercial purpose or a government purpose, you need to get a permit. Recreational operators are not required to do that. Now, the key thing to understand there is what's recreational and what's not. So basically, if you're doing it for fun and no other reason, and there's no other outcome from that operation other than you enjoyed it, then it's recreational. If you sell the picture, even though you flew for fun, you take a picture and then you sell the picture or use the picture to promote a business or to advertise something, any of those types of things, that it now becomes a commercial operation.
So using it for research, would that be considered?
Yes, that's commercial use.
Research would be anything other, just like Chris said, anything that is not pure fun.
Right. If you're just
pure fun researching.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and a lot of people do.
Yeah.
That's a fair point, but that's more than pure fun.
Right.
That's pure fun plus.
Yes.
So just to clarify, so I'd be classed as a government operator. There's the DOT knowledge test. Is there a second test to satisfy FAA at a testing center?
Yes. So they're two separate things. So the FAA's remote pilot certificate, they're think of it as a pilot's license for drone operators, which is exactly what it is. All right. So if you were to go get a pilot's license, you have a written test that you have to take at a testing center, and then you have to do a practical exam where you show them how you fly. Okay. That's to get a private pilot's license or any of that kind of stuff. For drones, they've gotten rid of the practical part. Okay. Because it's not practical for them to try to test 1,000 different types of drones that change every day. So they have a written test. And that written test, it deals with FAA rules, airspace, communicating with air traffic control, all those types of things. That's required to get your remote pilot certificate. North Carolina permit test is much simpler, and it's all online. You don't have to go to a testing center to do that. And it primarily focuses on North Carolina law.
And then you have to retake that test, like you said, the permit for NC is good for 2 years.
Correct.
But then you have to retest for the other one?
The FAA test? Yeah, since it's just come out, it's not been out long enough for anybody's certificate to expire yet. We're not sure exactly what the refresher test is going to be like, but yeah, there will be a refresher test. The expectation is they're going to do the refresher test online. They have an online option for people that already have a pilot's license. So if somebody's a private pilot or a commercial pilot, that type of thing, there is a UAS rating test that they do online. It's a little course that they do online. You don't have to go to a testing center. So we're expecting them to do their refresher that way, but we don't know for sure yet.
You mentioned about notifying the property or why. What does a utility easement, like negate that?
So
So
the question is private property the same as utility easement in terms of permission and so forth? Okay.
yeah, so that's a great question, and to tell you the honest truth, I'm probably going to throw this back to the lawyer to comment on. But the utility easement, whoever owns that easement, or whoever, if it's an easement is still generally private property, okay? So typically I would say your best practice there, without knowing exactly how this is going to get interpreted in the courts, best practice there would be to get permission from the property owner for your launch and recovery, okay? That's what the permission requirement really deals with, is wherever you're doing the launch and recovery. If you have the option to launch and recover out of the public street or whatever, obviously you would need permission from the city or the county, whoever owns the street. As far as the distribution of the photos, if you have people's private property and people in those images, and it's personally identifiable, you need to get permission from those people before you distribute those images. The way the law is written, it's not really trying to deal with the capture of those images, but rather the distribution, because we recognize that it's very easy to capture somebody standing in their backyard if you're flying down a power transmission line, for example, and they happen to be in their backyard, and that abuts the area where that transmission line's going, for example. So we don't want to make you have to go deal with permissions for every instance before you go capture the imagery. But if you do capture imagery that you need to keep or you need to use, distribute, that includes persons in that image that are personally identifiable or personally identifiable property, you need to get permission before you distribute those.
So let me just add to that on the question of easement versus private properties. What Chris said is true. Generally, when there's an easement, a utility easement, it means there's a private property owner that owns the property, but it is subject to an easement. And the precise scope of that easement could vary depending upon the utility. The easement that is given to an underground utility might be different in scope than the easement that's given to an above the ground utility. And the interest that the easement holder, that the utility itself has in drone operations over that easement might vary as well. Somebody with an underground gas line easement really might not care if you're flying over the easement, because you can't see anything that's their utility anyway. Somebody who owns an easement that's over the ground for, say, electrical lines might care a whole lot about you flying a drone over the property that has the easement, because it could get caught in power lines. You could wind up capturing a video that reveals that there is some problem with the electrical lines, and the electric company might care an awful lot about that. So definitely you would want to talk to the private landowner, but depending upon what your purpose and function are out there, you might decide that you also want to try to make a call to the utility to find out what their feeling is about it. Because, the way that these things spin out of control is when something bad happens. Your drone gets caught in a power line, all of a sudden you have a problem that you're going to have to try to fix on the back end rather than having dealt with it on the front end, if that makes sense.
Can I ask a lawyer question?
Fire away.
So does that mean I should probably in our easement start putting some language in there? So I work for Duke Energy and I'm a real estate group. Should we start writing some sort of, we have rights, right? But should we start writing it something like that to cover that?
Yes.
That's not exactly the answer I was going to give. So the question is to whether or not you should, as an easement holder, start putting specific language in. One of the things that Representative Torbett said right up front was when the legislature, when he was drafting legislation, one of the things that they looked at was what other laws already exist that are technology neutral, like a peeping Tom law, that it's not going to matter whether it's a drone or whether it's something else. And so I think the same thing would apply to contracts generally, and policies of all kinds, which we'll get into actually when Wayne talks a little bit. Examine those sorts of documents to determine whether there's already language that's already sort of fully encompassing, because as soon as you start, there's a legal concept, I hate to bore you all, but there's a legal concept that if you start identifying specific things, sometimes it will be interpreted by a court to mean that you have excluded everything you haven't mentioned. And so, yes, you should absolutely, as Representative Torbett said, you would absolutely want to be looking at those issues. Whether or not you would actually make any linguistic changes is something to think long and hard about. And within your legal group, certainly to have those discussions. I think it's important to have those discussions. Don't assume that it's covered. Don't assume that it's not covered. But look strategically at when and where language would be appropriate to add.
Yeah, and definitely make sure you're considering both the data collection aspects as well as the transit and physical access, launch and recovery aspects.
So let's do like one more question with Chris, because I do want to move on and get some other stuff on the table.
Okay, yeah, just to build on what you're talking about, maybe you'll cover this later, but I mean, it does bring up a very important kind of gray area that the FAA has not settled. And there was the case in Kentucky, the Boggs case, the Drone Slayer, that was, we were hoping would address this, which is, where's your right in the national airspace and the landowner, and where does your right begin as a pilot collecting geospatial information, whatever it is.
Right.
And right now, to my knowledge, it's still kind of ambiguous. There was some case law in 47 or something about chicken farm.
Right.
But and that was at 87 feet, I believe, somewhere in that range. But we still don't really know. The FAA said they may have precedence, fuel precedence of the national airspace. But we haven't really said, where does your right in as an owner, a property owner, where does your right begin as someone who's flying? An effort to...
So you're absolutely right. That's still somewhat ambiguous. The way that it's kind of been dealt with loosely, vaguely so far, is this whole idea of curtilage, okay? And again, that's tied to where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Unfortunately, if we're waiting on the FAA to address that issue, it's probably not going to happen. Because in the end, that is not a navigable airspace or an airspace safety issue. It's a privacy issue, and they try very hard to stay out of that arena, as they should. That's not their job, and they're not experts in it. They don't get it. That's not their job. But it's definitely something that we keep an eye on. We try to deal with. We don't have any specific regulations defining what is curtilage vertically. There are different interpretations that have come out in different places, and some specific municipalities have a definition. And the most common one that I've seen is it goes up to 400 feet.
Is there a commerce to push to create case law? For example, the Boggs case, find something for all initiatives.
There's an inevitability that at some point case law will be enacted.
Right.
Yeah, so let me say, for purposes of y'all, so for purposes of the GIS community, so those are fascinating questions. Those are questions I love. They're questions that I was specifically told not to address on this panel, because they're esoteric and to some degree academic until there's actually a real live case. But so because it is important for you all to understand as you're using this technology for real actual purposes in the commercial sector, there is something called the NTIA. You may have heard of their voluntary guidelines. They put together a multi-stakeholder process, and they came up with privacy guidelines that also apply to sort of accountability for the use of drones in the commercial sector. And so anybody who's going out and using, let's say you're using drones for survey purposes, it would be, I would say, prudent for you to familiarize yourself, or for your organization to familiarize itself with these voluntary guidelines, because they make certain suggestions. Again, they're only voluntary, it's not the law, but they make certain suggestions about how to deal with what winds up actually being dealing with some of those issues, right? If you follow these voluntary guidelines and you make disclosures and you get consent from folks, or at least you notify folks that you're going to be out surveying property, so that, you know, if somebody on the back 40 of their property is engaged in an act that they would rather not be caught on video, and you're surveying adjoining property, if you've notified that other landowner that you're going to be out there on a particular day, they will probably change their mind about going out there. And so that's one way to sort of deal with some of those thornier issues up front, is by being proactive and take a look at the voluntary guidelines that were put together by the NTIA stakeholder process. NTIA, like capital N, capital T, capital I. And if you look at voluntary drone privacy guidelines, it'll pop up. So with that, let me keep this moving, and what I want to do is turn it over to Wayne. One of the things that is interesting to me is sort of where Chris was just discussing what are sort of the hard and fast rules of the law, to the extent that there are hard and fast rules about any law. And what's interesting to me is where that intersects with any organization's policies and prudence and risk profile. And so what Wayne is going to talk to us a little bit about is, you know, how can we make some sense? How can we take those actual laws, and when we begin to think about the process as an organization as to when we're going to use drones, why we want to use drones, what best practices for drone use are, those are things that every organization has to consider. It's one thing to understand what the law says you can and can't do, but it's a whole other thing for your organization to understand what they really want to do and what they don't want to do. And so Wayne's going to tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Mike Causey, our State Fire Marshal, sends his regards. I think in the room there's a lot of knowledge here. And when I look at this committee of what the knowledge is here in North Carolina on unmanned aircraft systems, just amazing. So I want to encourage you to ask questions. We got about another 30 minutes. And Kyle's yet to come up, but there's a lot of knowledge here. So if you got questions, I would grab them afterwards. He's talking about the chicken farmer in Kentucky. I think he lost his rights when Google Earth was born, right? So with Google Earth, I mean, it's all see within just a matter of time. So the technology is there. Talking about policies, when I think of GIS, is that I'm not a GIS person, but I thought, you know, if I was ever going to retool myself, I would become one of you. I mean, it just intrigues me, working with data, maps, and helping others. How we use it in our department is that, anybody here, volunteer, firefighter, rescue, EMS, anybody? How we use it in our office with GIS is that, what are those little red things that stick around the community in your city? It sticks up on a sidewalk or on a street or a road. What is that? Hydrants, right? So we collect that hydrant information, goes onto a map. So when we go out and do a survey to those departments, we collect that map, and that map has got all their water distribution points from who? Who put that there? You. Somebody took that knowledge, put it in, so when we look at it, we can give them a rating on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being non-rated, 1 being the best. We can use that as a tool to be able to rate that fire department. And that number that we give them, whether it's a 2, 3, 4, or 5, is that information is given to the insurance industry, and then they use that to calculate what on your homeowner's insurance policy? Your fire insurance. So using technology, using GIS, we use that in the fire service every day. I wish I had 2 or 3 of you in my office. I mean, I would keep you busy, but it just not happens. So you're very important to our industry, so thank you for doing that. Policies related back to GIS is that I'm going to tell you here in just a minute what the national policy is on the use of drones or unmanned aircraft systems. I want to just sum it up on what that national policy is on the operation. That's it. Any questions? We have none. We have none. It's growing so fast. I was reading an article yesterday that in any given day, there's 100,000 drones in the air somewheres. I was just reading on Twitter earlier about Air Maps just raised $25 million to start coming up with paths that drones can start using out in their community, whether it's UPS or anybody delivering. They're going to be coming up with maps just like our airlines have today, but 100,000 in the air. And we don't even have a mapping system yet of where they're going to be able to fly, where to be able to go. I mean, if you thought that about the airline industry, would we put 5,000 jets with passengers on it in the air and not having a clue where they're going to be able to go to be able to not hit each other? So it's almost like it's reversed, right? So we're behind the 8 ball. And as far as GIS, how can GIS, the policies that we have, be able to, and I'm thinking this slanting in from fire and rescue, the policies out there that we need to start looking at. Policies on collecting data. What can we do with that data? Has anyone had, as far as someone fly, do an aerial mission and bring you back the data and ask you to do something with it? Anybody? Yes? Okay. And I'm going to put you on the spot, okay? Okay. So what kind of data was that they give you?
Also, it's UAS.
U.S. data. So it's a flyover. All right. And what did you do with that data?
I created a dead surface and made a picture of 3D model.
Did everybody hear that? Say it again loud.
I created a 3D model.
3D model. Okay, so using this data. So how is this going to work in search and rescue during disasters, where we start having fire departments, emergency management start flying these missions, and they bring this data back to you and says, here, I want you to do this or whatever. What is your policy to do that? You got a policy?
Actually,
You do.
I'm emergency manager.
So this is a person that you need to connect with to be able to get that policy shared, because out there currently we don't have a lot of policies. Okay, we're doing a search and rescue and we're flying over an area and it was once a cemetery and now the cemetery is flooded. What usually happens in a flood when the cemeteries are flooded? Anybody know? Caskets come to the top, right? They start floating. In that case where you have a lot of water coming in at one time, you get people swept away, right? And in this data that you're collecting, that you're being given, what could possibly be in that data? What's your policy for handling data, video feeds that's got dead people in it? Is there a policy that you have? So we're in uncharted waters as far as what policies goes. But if I was going to start setting up policies, and I was given something to a fire department, and then by the way, there's over 1,300 fire departments in the state, and they all want a drone, but they really don't know how to go about getting it. I mean, you can purchase one at Sam's, don't get me wrong, but once you do that, what do you do with it? What do you do with the data to be able to do that? How do you secure that data? What's the policy? What's the retention policy on keeping that data, and who gets to see it? Is it now public information? So if the news media comes in and asks for it, is it now public information? What are those policies that you're going to set up to be able to fly? Who's going to fly this bird? Somebody with 2 hours? Somebody with 3 hours? 20 hours? What is that threshold? There's not a policy out there that I know of that says, we've come up with an idea around 20 hours. It'd be a safe bet if you're going to be flying missions, but there is no policy. So we're still brand new in this. So this is two-way conversation, right? Two ways. So we're here to get information as well. So as a GIS person working with fire rescue, or even other industry with emergency management, what do you see down the road that's going to be something that we need to address? What are some of the, I don't say roadblocks, but detours that we're going to be able to see that's going to be able to keep us from doing our job with it on your side of it? We fly, we give you the data. What are going to be your needs down the road from us? That's crickets. In the back. All right, I'm going to repeat your question. The question is that if you got other aircraft that are with pilots flying manned, what's the policy having unmanned aircraft in the area. And we just went over that in a tabletop exercise a couple of weeks ago, and we think it will work, but you got to have a policy. And that policy, that what we saw was working well is that, one, the pilot has to know exactly where that drone is, where that UAS is. There has to be like south of Highway 64, and you don't pass 64 with that drone, so they stay on the east side of it to be able to stay clear. And there's got to be that communication going back and forth with ground. So yes, that's got to have a policy. If you're going to be doing search and rescue using drones and manned pilots, is that, because I don't even know if it's been tested yet as far as if a drone goes through a 777, through a turbine, to a helicopter, what's going to be the end result? And I'm sure it's not going to be pretty. So yes, that's a good policy we need to be thinking of down the road. Others. Some other policies you may have thought about, especially if you're working with folks that are using drones, is that the policy is how many hours, how many minutes have you got on that propeller? What's your policy on drinking and saying, hold my beer and watch this, and you go out there and fly a drone? By the way, that's how legislation is usually made, right? Bills are passed, the laws, because somebody said, hold my beer and watch this. So how much time is on the batteries? You know, the batteries are not going to last forever, right? So what's the policy on storing that battery? Anybody hear any horror stories on storing batteries? Policies on that? Yeah, is that if you store it up to 100% and you take it out and you store it, depending on the battery, day, 2 days, 3 days, they start coming down and reduce power automatically, so they're not staying fully charged. In some cases, they get really hot. So where I store my battery is in the fireplace. Because if it's going to catch on fire, where's it going to be at in the house, right? So with no fire going, of course. What is your policy on yearly training? Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be quarterly? So those are some of the things that we're looking at down the road. And I've got 30 pages here, and I was going to print it, but they said to keep it brief, bold, and brilliant. And I don't know about the brilliant part, but I was trying to keep it brief and bold, at least in time for Kyle to speak. Policies. What do you see? Anything else? Any last-minute thoughts over here? Great question. Insurance, liability. So as a hobbyist, would you need to have any type of insurance? Is that covered? Probably not. Especially if you're a Part 107 commercial now, is that definitely get some liability insurance. If you're a state agency, the Department of Insurance has a policy for you guys to be able to cover you. But if you are flying for Duke or you're flying for anybody else, you need to have that liability policy, because just sure enough, the thing's going to go away, it's going to go through the windshield of the school bus, and it's going to flip over, and there's going to be injuries. So you definitely want to make sure you're covered with a policy. Absolutely.
Everybody may be aware of this already, I'm not sure, but if you're a private company, you're not in depth organization, and you're providing data that is physically tied with some level of accuracy to a location, you got to be a survey. So, or up to on the risk of more than recycling those things without being licensed surveyor, and you can end up,
Great question. I'll repeat it. If you're going to be doing surveying, and you're going to be surveying an Interstate 40, can just anybody go out and use that drone and survey? Now, you probably need to be a licensed surveyor to be able to actually operate that drone for credibility purposes. Some companies that use drones, they require their folks to be a licensed pilot before they fly the drone. In search and rescue is that we use different tools out there, dogs for different reasons. We have cadaver dogs. We have dogs that would hunt for someone that may be dead. And then we've got dogs that may be hunting for someone that's alive. So you wouldn't use a rabbit dog to go be used as a cadaver dog, right? You want to make sure that person or that thing meets the criteria. And that's what I would encourage you to do, is that for credibility purposes, especially if it's ever brought up in court, the first thing you're going to say is, what was that person's qualifications flying? Other than a drone pilot, do they even really know what a survey means? So yes, I encourage you to make sure you got that in. Back here.
surveying application, but when I'm operating drone, you need to have proper license by FAA. So it's not till you get back that information back to your office and you start to make some type of survey product measurements that you cross over into the realm of survey. When I'm collecting data with the drone is one thing. Simply a vehicle is a platform. You bring that image back, you start doing something
And he just re-emphasized what we were just talking about, is that being licensed in that area. Anything else? Any other questions on policies? Is that hopefully you're going to start seeing some policies coming out, and Kyle will talk more about that from his organization, that we can have that. We're going to use these policies coming from North Carolina and push them down to the National Fire Protection Association. They're the ones that develop policies and standards for fire and rescue in our state, for firefighter, for rescue. And we hope to push those down to them to where now this will become not just statewide, not just U.S.-wide, but actually around the world. We've got departments that will adopt these NFPA standards. Stephen?
Thanks, Wayne. I appreciate that. I think considering you were talking about caskets and cadavers multiple times, I think that was pretty interesting stuff. Last up is Kyle. Kyle's going to kind of tie this all together and fill in any gaps. So let's hear from Kyle.
I'm back to clean up here, and after you three, it's certainly messy. So, no, Tim, I appreciate the invitation to pull these guys together and make me look good. And Stephen's always good for doing that. There really isn't anything else that needs to be covered. They've kind of given you the background and everything. What we've been working on at NC State with John's money through Chris is running a couple of TTXs, tabletop exercises here. The one we did last month that Wayne was part of, specifically looking at how would you use UAS in emergency response scenarios. And the goal for that was now how to do airspace integration so that other aircraft can use that same airspace. Our goal for that coming out of that was best practices. We're working on the final report right now. I've got a draft over to Chris to review that now. Those best practices is what DOT is posting up on their website now. That's the information we're trying to get out so that as your program starts standing up, you know what you can reference. And specifically looking at what kind of crews we need, right? Do you need data analysts? Do you need GIS people now? Are there opportunities for you guys to go plug in with these agencies when there's an air boss, when there's an incident commander, when the rest of that structure comes together? We're looking at the next exercise, looking specifically for DOT at the impacts of a coastal storm, looking at the highways washing out, looking at bridge inspections afterwards, both above ground or above the water and underwater with remotely operated vehicles underwater, looking at shoaling and the impacts there with coastal erosion now on the ferry system. Flying is a very small piece of all that, exactly like Keith was saying, and we've been working with photogrammetry and surveys for a while now, to say, okay, now we've got all this great imagery. We can go out, we can go fly it, now we've got these permissions. And DOT has suffered with us for quite a while on jumping through the FAA hoops. So we've got a bunch of data now, but working with this now that we've flown it, how do we use this data? And that's really what UAS operations come down to. Flying's one thing. It's great flying for research. We've been doing it now for a long, long time. Our team has over 225 hours of flight time now. So if you need pictures of something, let me know. We probably have something that we can share, whether it's corn or is it infrastructure. Just let me know. We've got a lot of that. Some of it's digital elevation models. Some of it's just straight up video. But we've got that built in now at NC State. But that's the goal for this now within the state. And we're going to talk about this more in the next panel, not to kind of plant the seeds. But we've got people that are going to show imagery. It's kind of hard to come to a GIS conference and not show imagery. So we'll take care of that in the next panel because Christian's going to do that one for us. But to kind of get to some of his points and your questions about transponders and where things are going in airspace, we're doing a lot of work at NC State, working both with DOT and folks downtown here, but also with the FAA through the Assure Research Center of Excellence. That's the FAA's program that's tackling these big issues, like how are we going to do package delivery? And honestly, that's going to impact these things like how do I fly at low altitudes? If Amazon's going to fly, from a warehouse to my house, or vice versa, from my house down to the Walmart to pick up a tube of toothpaste. Is there a high altitude route at 400 feet, a low altitude route at 200 feet, or below that, so that we deconflict even drone operations at those kind of low altitudes away from the big guys up top? Right now, that's a big issue, not just at the state level, but a probably bigger issue up at the federal level, as you've got these League of Municipalities and some of these organizations that are saying, we don't want people flying over our cities below 200 feet. It's a noise nuisance, but the FAA says you're cleared to fly below 400 feet. And that's kind of where the FAA stands. So this is a hot topic right now that there's not going to be an easy answer for. And it's going to be the technology solutions that are going to enable that when we get to transponders or that Internet of Things in the sky. And that's what we get to test out. That's where having this kind of discussion at the state level, having your inputs, being able to feed directly into these guys here allows us to kind of help shape that up. What does the state want to do? What do we need to be trying to tackle? And then what do we get to kind of fill in as a research group at state? So The best practices are going to be out. We're going to update all that stuff, so that's going to be coming out next month, posted on the DOT website. If you need any of those links, let Chris know, let me know. That stuff's easy to get out. That's going to tackle expectation management, crew selections, who needs to be flying, what kind of policies do you need to establish of how to work with vendors? Is it service providers? When you're having that question with a service provider that says, yes, here, buy my equipment, or we can come fly for you, how do you make those decisions? Who owns that data, especially because you're going to be a commercial operator with the commercial DOT permit. So you may not have the same data management requirements you do as a state agency, but they may put those requirements on you as part of their contract. So those are the things to kind of walk through, and we walk through a lot of that in the policies for the best practices. The C2 stuff and the research we've talked about under UTM, so I'd rather kind of leave this open. Like I said, I was batting cleanup just to make sure we didn't leave anything hanging. So I want to open up for these guys or any other questions we've got.
It'd be nice if there was a calibration site someplace close to the safe air specs that we can at, particularly for surveying.
It'd be great if there was a calibration site for testing and evaluation and as they get ready to go.
Trying to work with the state highway patrol and test track that they weren't key.
Right. Now that the commercial rule is opened up, what we need to look at is how to do that, right? What do we do to set up those sites where we can look at how do I go test? Is it the survey imagery?
Yeah, you get people want to vet somebody's ability to fly.
And so this is what I've been working with Wayne with, and one of the big things that came out of the tabletop exercise last month was that standard for certification. The FAA has their piece, the state permit is another piece. If you're going to operate now as a surveyor, as an emergency responder, as a fire guy, what are those requirements you want on top of that? And one of the things our consortium at NC State has said is we've got to make sure that we do more than just what the FAA requires. So you understand some of these best practices. So that is something I'm really trying to look at this year of how do we build that up? What does that infrastructure need to be? What do you need? What do you guys need to recognize to say, yes, I understand what that capability is? So I'm glad you're bringing that up. Chris, you good?
Yeah, so great point. This is all a really good point. So what we're dealing with, we're looking at the remote pilot certificate from the FAA or the North Carolina UAS operator permit. Basically what those are is trying to make sure that people understand how to operate in the airspace safely and legally. That's it. It says nothing about their ability to do the type of mission that you're looking for. So as you all understand, there are training, sometimes certifications, experience, all those other things come into play with different types of missions that are different, one from another. Somebody that has a lot of experience doing photo collection flights for surveying, okay, may be great for that type of mission, but if you need somebody to operate in a emergency management scenario doing search and rescue, they're not necessarily going to know what they're doing. They might, but they might not. So in the end, you kind of have to look back at what is my end goal, what am I trying to get out of this, and then work your way back forward to the methodology that you are going to use to collect that. If your end goal is to do a survey where you're doing measurements and you're actually creating a survey grade product, then you have to back that up to all the way to the collection. And are there certain requirements I need to impose on the collection to make sure that not only I get the data that I need, but that that data is collected with someone with the proper credentials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Back to the point we had before. So I guess that would be my advice for, especially when you guys are looking at policies. Any of this type of stuff is really, kind of start with what you want, what outcome you want to achieve, and then back your way into back up to get the methodology there and figure out what do we need to require of either a vendor, a service provider, just data requirements, et cetera, in order to get what we're looking for. So that's a good question. There's no reciprocity with the North Carolina permit because the North Carolina permit deals with North Carolina specific laws. Those laws are not necessarily the same anywhere else. So their permitting, if they have permitting requirements, which a lot of states don't, may not match at all. Now, as far as the FAA certification, remote pilot certification, that's a federal level, and it covers all of the national airspace in the United States.
Is anybody at this table aware of any other state that has a permit?
That's inevitably on its way. Interstate commerce clauses and the like will inevitably push the states to have some kind of unilateral understanding. I don't see it this year, next year, whatever, but I know it's being worked on out there.
So at this point, you have to realize that doesn't necessarily mean that you can apply in other states.
Exactly. We have people that call me, call Kyle, call our other colleagues every week, saying I'm from Tennessee or I'm from Texas or Louisiana or whatever. I've got my Part 107. Can I fly in North Carolina? And all we can answer for is for North Carolina.
And in that regard, if I could say, any regulated industry is like any other regulated industry in terms of what other states do. So if you sell insurance in the state of North Carolina, but you want to sell insurance in Virginia, you have to figure out what their regulatory requirements are. So think of it from the perspective of, hey, I'm involved in a regulated industry, and I need to make sure to keep myself educated about what other states and what localities are doing.
Just to build on that, I'm curious, there's certain things in North Carolina you cannot regulate. I would going further, because this is such a patchwork thing right now. There's different counties and cities that drone laws. Do you have any precedent over counties and cities that they might make rules more restrictive?
Yes.
So we're just about out of time. If anybody, I think that was great punctuation on the session right there. Representative Torben, if you, do you have any final comments for the crowd?
Guys, it's just exciting to be here. I know y'all see it. Y'all understand it, what's coming around. I mean, look 20 years ago and now look at where we are today, and can only imagine what's coming in the next 10 or 20 years. UAS it's here to stay. It's not going away anywhere. We're going to have some skint knees and bruised elbows as we go down the road, but inevitably it is the most amazing and remarkable new market coming out there, and it will inevitably hit all aspects of our daily lives. Personally, I long for the day to get my pizza at a much faster time than I currently get from my apartment on Avent Ferry Road. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoy being here. My door is always open. I'm at 538 Legislative Office Building. We call that the Lob. So you're always welcome to come by and see us. I would encourage you to do this for me and for all of us. I don't want to make edicts or mandates. It's about this. Industry needs, sort of along your question back there, industry kind of needs to make their own decisions relative to their industry. What we're there is trying to do a 50,000-foot view of personal privacy and safety of the citizens at large. You help us police your industry, yourselves, and then help us with issues that you see confronting you relative to UAS that would make it easier and more operational friendly. Bring it to me, and then we can do this together. I spoke to the attorneys at Campbell Law just a couple weeks ago and kind of left them with this. Inevitably, once again, it will be up to courts of law at some point in time that will push this rules and regs and what you can and what you can't do down the road. I have no doubt about that. But also, it's folks like you guys that will be using this day in and day out that can help better that. So please always feel free to bring me your ideas and your thoughts and your processes, and let's see if we can just make it a better North Carolina with the use of UAS in the marketplace.
That's great. Join me in thanking our panelists.